How's it going, everybody? And in this video I'm gonna go into a little bit more of an in-depth explanation of kind of mostly my newest discovery. It's just kind of breaking down and discovering the different layers of infinity and the different kind of the different modes and the forms. So there are different forms of infinite, because you can have infinite prior and infinite after, which are kind of two separate modes. And it's almost kind of like the yin and the yang because they're equal and opposite, but they're both very perplexing in nature itself, for its existence to begin with. But let me give you everyone a quick example, because I recently found a really good way to explain how it works. And I think this is what's been confusing the science of existence for so long, is because everything has to kind of be defined further and pulled back and stretched out and accommodated for. So it's kind of one of those things that the more you keep looking at something, the more it pops out. So it's just, I think humanity is at that point there that we've been looking at all this science and math behind everything, that we're having all these new breakthroughs and everything is popping out. So I think this is okay. Let me give you guys the quick explanation. This ties into my last video, but I actually didn't get into the in-depth explanation of how it breaks down and what it looks like. Okay, so when you have the ratio 0.99, the remainder is 0.01, which is like 1 out of 99. I believe it's 1 out of 99 because you have the 99 ways that it can or cannot occur and the one way that it can or cannot. So 1 out of 100, which is like 1 out of 100. Or, well, we won't write it 1 over. We'll just say it's like 100 because we know that we're doing 1 out of 100. So when you write the ratio, what happens is let's say that you write the ratio 99.9. I'm sure everyone has all seen, at those dollar stores, kills 99.9% bacteria. So what's the remainder on this? That's when I started to realize how infinity broke down and made it so perplexing. Because I started realizing how each number is its own number and its own. It's like everything becomes new with each new number. So it doesn't, you'll reach a point, if you keep adding so many nines, where it doesn't look like anything is changing, but that's when you have to understand what's happening and what it's doing and know that it's different and that it's changing every time. It doesn't look like it is, because you'll reach a point where the number, you just add another 0, or add another 9, because it's kind of one and the same, which I'll kind of explain. But let me show you what this breaks down to here. Okay, so we got the paint bucket. I need to do the background here, a different color. Okay, so what this breaks down to is so remember in math they always said move the decimal over. two places to write it as a fraction. So now it's actually 0.999% as a fraction, which is like 1 out of 999. Or 1,000. See, you just add, when you add 1 to the fraction, it's like adding 1 0 to the results, or the remainder, it actually isn't the remainder, it's just the total sum of the percentage to the whole, basically, of the fraction that you're dealing with. Like, this would, so whenever they tell you, oh, it kills 99.9% of germs, that's what it means. It is killing 1 out of 999 bacteria, or 999. For every 1,000 bacteria, it's going to kill 999. And then there's only going to be 1 that might remain, or expected to remain. So it's different if they were to tell you the percentage is 99.99%. See, this is a completely new number, and it doesn't look like it's changed much, but when you look at what's happened and what it's doing, you'll realize the fraction continues every time. Alright, so this is how infinity begins. When infinity is beginning, all infinity does is add more. Adds another, adds another, adds another. Or it's basically times 10, times 10, times 10, times 10, times 10, times 10. See, it's the same thing, however you want to look at it. If you add another 9, or if you just times 10, times 10, times 10, times 10, or just 0.999999. See, it's like the same thing. Because now you're looking at 1 out of 9999. Which is 10,000. See? So the thing with infinity is 99.999, and you just write infinite amounts of 9s though. Alright, so 999. See, that's another way to write the fraction. Infinity as a fraction. So that's how you write infinity as a fraction, is 9.99999 infinitely. Because the thing is, for every new 9 that is added to the fraction, everything changes and it's still becoming a new number. See, most people get confused, like, oh, well, what happens after you get to the 10 quadrillionth, bazillionth, 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 trillionth 9? The same thing just happens. Another 0 is added, and it just becomes larger, it becomes bigger, and it becomes a new number. It always becomes a new number, and it can always get bigger. So the science behind infinity is you have to look at if it's before or after infinity, because there are two different ways and modes to perceive infinity, in theory, to be perceiving it before its occurrence and after its occurrence. So it's just a matter of which side of infinity are you on. So we all know that there is potentially only one person or one thing that is even on the other side of infinity, okay? Because we expect that those are the circumstances and the odds of the event to even occur. But the thing is, the science does dictate that there could be multiple things that existed, for eternity, or aspects. It's just a matter of if it's actually the way it is or is not. So that's kind of also what infinity symbolizes, is always or never. So infinity is symbolic for all sorts of representation. It's kind of symbolic for the yin and the yang as well. So to exist prior to infinity, okay, that's God. All right, so he was always in existence. See, that's the difference of what we are. So that's the thing. God himself is basically 99.9999999% of all existence, because he always existed, and it's always going to remain to be that decimal, that fraction. It's, you can imagine it to be kind of like it's flattened, like almost like a steamroller rolled it over, and you could just imagine the steamroller being God, and then just flatten the number, and it's just literally permanently frozen at that fraction and that ratio of 0.999999999 infinitely, with 0.00 infinitely follow with the remainder of 1, because we know that the remainder is there. It just doesn't look like it's there because it's followed by the amount of infinite amounts of zeros. So remember that it's like the cap. So the cap on infinity is that the cap always just gets larger, and it's almost kind of like the top. So the remainder remains there as like the top of it. Even though there isn't a top, because the top can always reach a point that goes higher. It's the top that you can never reach the point where you can see it, or that you get past that point. So basically the science behind it is this. So when God existed prior to infinity, that's kind of the right way to word it. I don't know if that's exactly the right way to word it. But what it means is, okay, so for us, we exist after infinity. So our way to perceive infinity is we can potentially become infinite to an extent of being able to always continue, always go on, always be able to exist. See, it's kind of like being halfway infinite. So even though you didn't have that prior beginning of infinite existence, it's still like being infinite, because it still has that prolonged existence to infinity, which always goes on. It's just missing the other side, which doesn't have the no beginning. See, that's the other side of infinity, to have no beginning or to have no end. So God, he has no beginning. All that means is you can always just keep going back further. And remember, the further back you keep going, it's always like something else is actually happening, and there's all sorts of events that are occurring, all sorts of simulations that are, you're weaving through, because that's kind of what God is, or that's what God is. He's like a system of infinite amounts of simulation. So when you go back infinitely, you're going into a simulation of every possible result that could occur, that infinitely goes back, and then it always becomes a new number, and everybody thinks that, oh, well, you're going to reach a point at some point, because there's got to be some point. But that's the thing that makes it so perplexing, is he's on the other side. You can't reach a point, no matter how. So that's what makes it that's basically going to be the revelation of this video, is our odds of existence are tied to this number, the infinity. This is the number everyone needs to become most familiar with, I would imagine, as far as looking at the science of the universe, because of the phenomenon of how it operates, what we know about mathematics, what we know, the way mathematical, patterns operate. Basically, here's the phenomenon behind it. So now we know the true ratio of the way to perceive it. So we know that we already came out of infinity. So this is better left kind of like this, to know that this infinitely goes back. So this is kind of what infinity should be symbolized, kind of more like as an image. So there isn't a point, there's the end, because it always goes back. Which means that our point of existence, let's say we're right here, this little dot. I'll circle it. See that? Let's say that, or right at that line. You see that line? Let's say that's right at the crossroad to our existence. No matter how far forward this goes, what will be tied to the way it is and what the fraction is represented as the whole will be always the same. Infinitely, because it's tied to the remainder of 99.99 infinitely, because it's tied to. So you do have infinite amounts of zeros there. That's where everybody gets complex. Is, you can't have infinite amounts of zeros there. When in actuality, the universe operates in a way where you can, and it's there. So that's the infinite symbol. It's hard to see. So that's the duality of the fraction. So on one side of the fraction, it infinitely goes back. You see that? That's this side of the fraction. Alright, infinitely goes back, 99.99. So no matter what, now that we're at this point of existence, any point forward in time, it's already permanently going to remain the same. Because it's anchored and tied to going back infinitely. When it's anchored and tied to going back infinitely, like what you're looking at here, you're dealing with, no matter how far forward into time you want to go, it does not matter. Doesn't matter. You might as well perceive 100 years on a time scale to be the same as a time scale of 100 quintillion bazillion years, to a degree or to an extent, for the simple fact that it still remains to exist as the same fraction. The fraction always stays the exact same. Nothing changes. It will always remain at 0.999999 infinitely over 0.000 infinitely of 1. Because we're at that point of we began to exist. So that's what this line represents here, of when you cross that crossroad, is to have the beginning of existence. Once you have that point of the beginning of existence, you've reached the crossroads where everything now is the remainder. It's like virtually non-existent. Okay, that's why the nature of our universe, all this math and science and all these philosophers that are looking at it, they're all realizing how the universe is non-existent virtually. It's not there. It's nothing. That's why it comes back like that. That's why that's what it means to say that the universe does not exist, is because in actuality it's only like It's like nothing actually even exists. It's only like that. But in all actuality, the remainder, that's here, that's this, the remainder remains. It's there. Okay? So that means that there is the one. There is the one. Points this, the remainder right here. You see that? It's there. The 0, 1, it doesn't look like it exists. It doesn't, nobody realizes it's there due to the simple fact that you just have to know. You just have to understand that it's there. Because you're never going to be able to actually see it for, as it, to be at an ending point. But it's there. Which is the same thing as no matter how long anything has an existence for going into the future, that has a beginning still remains as the fraction of being virtually non-existent. Because you can infinitely go back. And that is the only reason that nothing ever changes. So it's almost like a race car track that goes both ways. So you have on the left side the race car track that goes back infinitely, but it always goes back further too, while the other side of the track has a beginning, but it always just keeps going forward progressively. Okay? So while one side's going forward, the other side is still going backwards, and it is always going backwards and can always go back further. So it accommodates for the gain or loss, basically, which is the reason why it remains to exist. Like it's flattened out, like a steamroller. It's almost like a vacuum pressure, sucked all the pressure out of everything. And it's just permanently just flattened out, like the way I see it, I just see there are actually a couple ways I perceive this number. It's kind of funny because I perceive it kind of in an artistic perception. I'll tell you both two ways that I look at it. The first way I think is probably the little more interesting way. So when I imagine the 0.999999 fraction that goes on infinitely, I kind of see it as a rope kind of being pulled, or I see it as the rope that's kind of being pulled off the back of like some sort of boat. So you have this long rope that just goes on and on infinitely, all right, and then at the very end you have the remainder hanging on to the end of the rope. You got the remainder hanging on to the end of the rope, but the rope is infinitely long. So you can imagine just somebody, kind of behind, on a, let's say a water tube, being pulled on a water tube on the boat. And their little freaking cord that they're being pulled on, it's just a freaking cord that's just pulling them God knows through where, throughout space and time, but the cord just goes on infinitely. But sure enough, the remainder, that's why the remainder is perceived to be so confusing and perplexing, is nobody thinks that there's gonna ever be somebody that's hanging on the end of that rope, water skin at the end of the frickin' rope. Like, how did anything get on the end of that rope that goes on infinitely? Okay, so that's one way to perceive it. What was the other way to perceive it? Oh yeah, the other way to perceive it is, like I was saying, it's just a 0.999 infinitely, and it's just kind of like going down to the ends of the universe infinitely, and it's just wrapping itself up infinitely over and over, and it's still just going on, and it's just pure madness. So anyway, that was the full in-depth explanation, to really, really make sure that the science behind it is in-depthly understood, because I know there was a little bit more room to add in the bigger details that I kind of miss. And I think it's a good thing that I broke it down into 2 videos, because I was able to adjust the microphone quality. And this microphone quality, I actually balanced it a lot better, and I got it set up a lot better. So this is probably the better video of understanding everything. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else to really throw into this, but yeah, that's really all there is to it. So existence, the phenomenon of existence is, there's a few main key points of the phenomenon of existence, which is to determine, which side of existence are you even on to begin with, or let's do it over here, are you on before or after? Did you always exist, or are you always going to exist, or are you always going to maybe be able to exist? So that's that's the crossroad of infinity, right in the middle of infinity here. To always exist, to always or never, because you can always go on or never go on. So the main mystery of the phenomenon of existence is the point, which is right here, the point of that crossroad, to begin to exist. That's the crossroad. That's where the magic happens. That's where everything transmutes, and it becomes a whole new reality of understanding in depth, phenomenon behind the science of, because it doesn't really stand out to be like some sort of key point of the science of it. But yeah, this is where it all changes and makes everything so different, is to be determined if you always existed before or if you always existed after, that's our only option. So what that means is we don't have the option to always exist before, because it's closed. That opportunity is closed. You would know if you were the one who was on that side of the opportunity, because you would easily recognize that you always existed and know that you always existed. So now once you know that you're not the one that always existed, that's where everything changes. So oh, well, I'm not the one that always existed, because if I was the one that always existed, I would know if I was on that side of infinity. So everything that exists, that did not exist for all eternity before, is just automatically going to be tossed out onto this side of the remainder. So that means that everything else is just going to be on the right side. Nothing else can ever be on the left side. Everything is always going to be on the right. It's kind of like you're looking at the fraction over again. It's almost like the fraction repeats itself, because now on the right side you got an event that always occurs infinitely over and over. It just happens again and again, and then on the left side it's something that's never going to happen, because it's either always there or it's never there. But the thing is that we have God that was always there, that's on that side. So he's already holding it down. He's already holding down, which is all we need. Is all anything needs to exist is for someone or something to hold down the existence of the left side, even one time, even if it's just one sole existence or creation or whatever. I mean, it's not really the best word to use, creation, but it's more like a existence of. So we only need one. We only need it to happen once. We only need it to occur once. So that's what we have in our favor, is that we don't need for this event to happen for everybody. It doesn't need to happen for you, because you would have been out of luck if it needed to happen for you. If that you happened to needed to always have existed to exist. So that's why we're so lucky, is that we never happen to need to always exist in order to exist. Oh yeah, the final part of the science behind this was to just go into the understanding of how no matter how far into the future you go, or you give time, because everyone says, oh, if you give it enough time, everything creates itself over again, and then you go into the multiverse, because you exist in infinite amounts of universes that create itself in infinite amounts of realms. But the thing is that's just a theory. That there's no way to prove that, because you can only prove that theory that, oh, I exist in another alternative reality that's exactly the same as this at the same time, like that where it's actually happening is where they say that. That's where they confuse what they're saying, and actually I believe get the information wrong. Because yeah, you can't prove that, oh, I exist in an alternative reality, and instead of in that universe, that I'm wearing a red shirt, I'm wearing a blue shirt. And then people think that, oh, this happens infinite amounts of occurrences. But like I say, you can't just say that, because that's the same thing. That's the same thing as if you're saying that you can say anything. You can't just say anything unless you have the circumstances that are known of. So you can't just throw out, oh, well, this can happen, if this can happen, if this can happen, if this can happen, if this can happen, because that's all most people are saying with the creation of random creation is, oh, well, as soon as this can happen, and this can happen, and this can happen. See, no, you can't take for granted that this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, when you don't actually know that this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. You can assume that maybe it has happened or could happen. See, it's safe to assume that it could happen to be, but that's really all there is to have any sort of safe assumption of, is that maybe it could, but you don't know. You don't know